How come I'm always on a last name basis, man?
Let's
Let you know that.
Just wanted to call this meeting to order of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. Before we get started, just wanted to at least recognize that this is a session like no other. And I think that it's more than appropriate to first recognize our colleagues on the here. So I just want to make sure that we recognize Senator Saling, Senator Edwards, and Senator Peters. And I also wanted to take the time out to just recognize the staff that helped to make it run. We've been blessed to have Nicholas Konzelman as our coordinator, PST, and just wanted to say thank you. We've also been, and I'll say them in alphabetical order by last name, Jacob Cash, Andrew Garrison, Emily Haskell, Jason Kramer, Steve McCulloch, Madeline Miller, Seth Twist, Caleb Weiss, and Tanya Zimmerman. We cannot say as a group how thankful we are in reference to everything that you do for the legislature and making sure that the people's business get done. At this moment, we'll go into our decision document and just go into start with decisions. So Nick, I'll let you call up the first analyst.
Okay, so we'll be working in budget code order. So we're going to start with the judiciary on page 1 of your decision documents. And Caleb, you want to kick us off?
Certainly. So the first item we have here is to reduce funds in the judiciary to increase the turnover rate to 2%. The agency concurred with this and the first House adopted.
Concur?
concur.
Perfect.
The second item we have here for the judiciary is also to reduce funds. This is to reduce funds for the fiscal 2022 general salary increase. The agency disagreed and the first House adopted.
Concur?
Concur.
The third, moving to the next page, page 2, the third action for the judiciary is to reduce funds for the 3.5% merit increase in fiscal 2022. The agency disagreed and the first House adopted.
Peters, is there Senator Peters?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to share the screen with the document on the screen. So we're just doing what's in our
Yeah,
hand.
we're doing it from paper.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. So where are we?
Page 2, number 3.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir. Senator Edwards.
I think we want to reject the first House action.
Sound like there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded to reject the first House action. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
The next action here, number 4, is to restrict 8.25 million for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur?
Concur.
The last action on this page, number 5, is to reduce funding for the capital improvement projects by $500,000. The agency concurred and the first House rejected.
Mr. Chair, we reject the first House action, adopt the DLS action.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion's been first and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
On the next page, page 3, the first one is a recommendation to adopt committee narrative requesting a report on the appointed attorney program. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur?
Concur.
The number 7 here is another piece of committee narrative requesting a report on major IT developments. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur?
The final action, number 8 here on this page, is requesting another report on judgeship needs in fiscal 2023. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur?
Moving on to page 4, item 9. This is requesting another report on court performance measures. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Concur.
On page 5, this is an additional first house action which restricted $50,000 pending a report on continuing legal education requirements and pro bono requirements for barred attorneys. The first house adopted this one.
Concur.
And then you have an additional item on page 6, which is committee narrative requesting a report on specialty court recidivism. And yeah, this is a new one. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Senator Peters, there's a motion to adopt the committee.
Second.
If
So moved.
seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Decisions for the Office of the Public Defender begin on page 7. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance, but the House adopted a color page regarding a comparison study of public defender pay, which is on page 8.
Senator Saley, it looks like what we like to concur with the House's color page.
Yes, sir. Concur.
Look like it's been
Second.
first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Then moving on to page 9 begins the Office of the Attorney General. DLS recommended increasing turnover on a position to 25% to allow for time for hiring process, which would be a reduction of about $22,000 in general funds. The first house rejected this recommendation.
Chair, I move we reject the first house and adopt DLS.
Second.
The motion's been first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Also on page 2, DLS recommended adopting narrative for a non-budgeted fund balances report, which would be authored by OAG and due on September 30th. The first house rejected this recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I move we reject house and adopt the action.
Motion has been first and seconded.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 10, there are 2 BRFA items related to the Office of the Attorney General. The first provision would alter the mandate to provide funding for the Office of the Attorney General financial consumer protection to special funds rather than general funds. And this was a general fund contingent reduction of $700,000. There was no response from the agency and the House rejected this provision.
Mr. Chair, I move we modify the BRFA action to $350,000 contingent reduction.
Second.
Motion's been first and second to modify the BRFA action to 350,000 reduction. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
The 31st provision of the BRFA would require the comptroller to transfer $10 million of consumer protection recoveries to the general fund by May 1st, 2022, if OAG did not transfer the amount before then. The agency rejected this rejected this provision, and the House rejected this provision.
Mr. Chairman, I concur with the first house.
Second.
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded to concur with the first house. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, on page 11, we have the Public Service Commission. Item number 1 proposes to increase the turnover expectancy from 4% to 6%. The agency disagreed and the first house rejected.
Mr. Chair, I move we reject the first house and adopt the DLS action.
Second.
Motion's been first and second to reject the first house and adopt the DLS action. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 12, the first house adopted additional actions. Item number 1 is narrative requesting report on increasing usage for consumer choice websites. and that the House had adopted this action.
Concur.
Okay, there's a color page item from the Senate on the bottom of page 12. It's related to electric vehicle charging equipment and the pilot program for that equipment.
Move we adopt, Mr. Chairman.
Motion's been put first
Second.
and seconded to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, on page 13, color page number 2 is narrative that requests a report on regulation related to energy suppliers. The report would be due on November 1st of 2021.
Thank you.
Adopt, Mr. Chair.
Motion's been first and second to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
The final color page is on the bottom of page 13. It is a report related to the notification of the notification of complaints against utility providers.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Motion's been first and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, on page 15, we have the Office of the People's Counsel. The DLS recommendation had been to concur with the governor's allowance. However, the House had adopted a color page item that begins on page 16. And this narrative requests a report on the adequacy of the cap for utility assessments for OPC, the Office of the People's Counsel.
Concur.
That brings us to page 17 and the subsequent injury fund. DLS recommended concurring. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur.
On the next page is the uninsured employers fund. DLS recommended adding some language to the budget that would restrict funds in several agencies pending a report on the structure of workers' compensation agencies and a personnel evaluation at UEF. The agency disagreed. The first House slightly modified this to restrict less funds. That language can be found on page 19. And then if you move on to the bottom of page 20 and continuing on to page 21 is some alternate language from the Senate that would restore the full restriction and add Chesapeake Employers Company as an author of the report.
Mr. Chair, I move we reject the first House and adopt the Senate color page.
Second.
Motion's been first and second to reject the House and adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 22, the Workers' Compensation Commission, DLS recommended concurring. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving now to Chesapeake Bay Commission on page 23. This is annual language on Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. The agency concurred in part, noting that they're willing to provide the report, but we're concerned about the restriction of funding. The first House adopted this action.
Concur.
Next agency on page 25, I believe it is.
Yep, so on page 26, we have the Maryland Energy Administration. Item number 1 was adopted by the House. It is narrative requesting information related to the Strategic Energy Investment Fund and the revenues, spending, and fund balance of that fund.
Concur.
Concur.
Okay. On page 27, item number 2 is again narrative related to the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund and the activities of that fund. The House had slightly modified some of the language in this narrative, and you can see that on the bottom of page 27.
Concur.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Nick, how much is that left in that fund for expansion?
Yep. This one is the report is, I believe. Nick, you could tell me if I'm wrong and what we care about next page.
That's right. So this is just narrative
Okay.
requesting information on the activities of that fund. There's no Item number 1 on page 29 is actually the restriction of that,
Okay,
the money in that fund.
thank you.
And so
Yes, sir.
if you want, we can jump to page 29.
Yeah, we concur with the narrative and
Sure.
jump to page 29.
Yeah, so the first House adopted additional language, and it would restrict $23 million of the $26.3 million available for renewable and clean energy programs, and would restrict it for a gas expansion. The House had adopted that language.
Senator Edwards.
Move we reject first House action, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Yes, sir. First and second to reject the first House action. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Item number 2 on the bottom of page 29 is narrative requesting information on electric vehicle recharging equipment and the rebate program for that equipment in mixed-use dwelling developments.
Concur.
Okay. Moving on to page 31. We have the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. DLS had recommended deleting 2 unfunded and long vacant positions. However, the first House had modified this action to restrict these 2 positions to be reclassified for the purposes of addressing staffing deficiencies related to grant oversight and grant management.
Okay.
We modified that, correct?
The House adopted the modification that you see on the middle of page 31.
Okay, concur.
Okay. Item number 2 is language related to Victims of Crime Act funding. And so the DLS recommendation begins on the bottom of page 31 and continues to the bottom of page 33. However, the first House had modified this to expand the reporting requirement to include reporting on available fund balances online, as well as creating a mechanism for establishing priority for victim service providers and the funding provided to those service providers in the event that VOCA funds decline or are otherwise unavailable. And so the first House modification begins on page 34 and continues on to page 38. However, there is a color page item for your consideration that slightly modifies the House version of that language. And you can see that modification on page 39. The only difference here is that it clarifies what a state provider is and what a non-state provider is.
Chairman, I move we modify the first House and adopt the Senate color page.
Second.
There's been a first and second to modify the first House and adopt the Senate color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, we're going to jump to page 43, where we have item number 3 for this agency. Item number 3 restricts funds so that the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services can contract with a private accounting firm to reconcile their grant expenditures and available grant fund balances. It also creates a reporting requirement for the office to report the findings of this audit, as well as explain any corrective actions taken associated with the findings of this audit. The agency concurred in part, the first House adopted.
Concur.
Okay, item number 4 on page 45 proposes to utilize available special fund balances to replace general fund expenditures for grants offered under the Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. The agency concurred, the first House adopted.
Concur.
Item number 5 begins on the bottom of page 45 and continues on to page 47. This is annual language that restricts funds pending the submission of the at-home placements report. The agency disagreed, the House adopted.
Concur.
There is an additional House action on page 48. It's narrative that requests a one-year update on the implementation of the Baltimore City Crime Reduction Strategy and quarterly performance metrics associated with those efforts. The House adopted this action.
Concur.
On page 49, there are two color pages for your consideration. The first restricts funds so that grant funding can be directed towards the Boys and Girls Clubs of Southern Maryland.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
The motion's been moved by Senator Peters and seconded by Senator Edwards. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Item color page number 2 on page 49 establishes a committee intent that local management boards and youth service bureaus, the funding that's provided to them through the Children's Cabinet Interagency Fund be restored to their funding levels prior to the Board of Public Works cuts this past summer.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion's been put forward to first and second to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving now to page 50, Department of Planning. The first recommendation there is to delete a long-term vacant planner position, $81,528 general fund reduction. The agency disagreed, noting this position could help out with various activities that are going on currently, including working on various census and kind of legislative needs. So the House rejected this action.
And this was the one that dealt with the census, correct, Andrew?
This position could help out the census and then also redistricting afterwards. It in the same kind of area, yeah.
And I believe that this was the one we also wanted to take the position of the House with this.
That would be to concur with the House to reject the DLS recommendation.
You're absolutely correct. We want to concur.
All right, next item on the bottom of page 50 is a color page item brought in by the Senate. It's to restrict $100,000 until a long-term or until a contractual full-time equivalent reviewer, tax credit reviewer, is converted to a regular position. There are concerns that there has been staffing turnover in the program, and with the conversion of that long-term contractual FTE, that would then enable for more stability there. And they would also provide for the restriction of funding for a staffing report to make sure that this kind of works out.
Adopt.
Second.
Motion and second to adopt color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
On page 52, we have the Department of Veterans Affairs. DLS concurred with the allowances introduced. However, we did also have a BRFA recommendation, item 105 there. This was to transfer $1 million from the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Special Fund into the general fund for fiscal 22. The agency disagreed with this, but the House did adopt this transfer.
Mr. Chairman, we need to reject this first House action.
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded to reject the first House action. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
And then we do have one other item for your consideration. Color page item number 1 is around complementary alternative medicine for veterans, particularly asking the Department of Health to be engaged with the Department of Veterans Affairs to help administer any new programs around these treatments.
Adopt.
Second.
Motion's been adopted by Senator Saling, seconded by Senator Peters to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On the next page, on page 53, we have the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund. It's non-budgeted. The agency concurred and the first House adopted. However, there is an additional Senate color page here, which requests a report on the possible change of the installment payment plan. Basically just ask Maryland Auto to submit a report updating the committees on their intent to propose legislation on this.
Mr. Chair, I move we reject the first House and adopt the Senate color page.
Motion's been put forward and seconded by Senator Saling to reject the first house and adopt the Senate color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving to the next page, page 54, we have the Maryland Insurance Administration. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
And then we also have a BRFA item here, which authorizes the transfer in fiscal 2021 of $5 million from the rate stabilization fund to the general fund. The first house adopted this.
Concur.
The next agency is the Comptroller of Maryland, 55. The first recommendation is to increase turnover to 7.75% and reduce special and general funds accordingly. The first house adopted this action, but there's also color page number 1, which would increase the turnover to only 7% and reduce the amount that is being reduced in general funds accordingly.
Mr. Chair, reject the first house and adopt the Senate color page to increase to 7%.
Second.
Motion's been first and second to reject the first house and adopt the Senate color page to increase to 7%. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
The second recommendation for the comptroller is to request a piece of narrative on the integrated tax system major IT project. The first house adopted.
Concur.
Page 56 is the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. The recommendation was to concur. The first house adopted.
Concur.
On page 57, we have the State Lottery and Gaming Control Agency. Item number 1 from DLS proposes to reduce the funding for lottery advertising to a level that's more in line with their historical spending levels and proposes to reduce it by $3 million. The agency disagreed, but the first house adopted.
Mr. Chair, I move we modify just to take $2 million.
Second.
Motion's been put forward first and second to modify to only reduce by $2 million. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
There's an additional color page on the bottom half of page 57 for your consideration. It's related to minority business enterprise participation in lottery advertising activities. This specifies not only MBE participation, but also MBEs that are actually Maryland-based companies.
Mr. Chairman, to re-adopt.
Second.
Motion's been put first and second to adopt the color page. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, that takes us on page 58 to the Department of Transportation. Item number 1 on that page is annual narrative requiring notification of changes to the capital program. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 59, item 2 is annual language establishing a position cap for the department. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
That takes us over to page 61 in the Secretary's office. Item number 1 is annual language that restricts operating grant and in aid funding to the amount budgeted. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 62, there was an additional House action adopted. It restricts $500,000 of the Secretary's office funding until reports on the Purple Line procurement for a replacement design build contractor are submitted. And again, this is first House action. 2 reports would be required. One when the procurement was finished, and then a follow-up next February for, in time to hear it for your budget hearings.
Thank you. We'll concur with the House actions.
Okay. There is on page 64, a second additional House action restricts $100,000 pending a report on sworn officer positions for the MTA police.
Concur.
That takes us over to page 66, which is the Secretary's Office PAYGO Capital. Item number 1 is annual language requiring notification of changes to the capital program. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
Page 67 is the WMATA operating grant. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 68 is the WMATA capital, the same thing. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 69 begins debt service requirements for the Department of Transportation. There are 3 pieces of annual language that have been adopted for many years. So I recommend you take them as a panel. Number 1 and 3 establish debt limits for transportation debt and non-traditional transportation debt. Item number 2 just requires reports on non-traditional debt.
Concur with all 3 items as a panel.
Okay, that takes us to page 72, which is the State Highway Administration operating. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. However, on page 73, the House did adopt narrative requesting a report on tourism signs along state roads.
So is there a motion to reject and adopt the language that was there for the microbrewery and the tourism signs along state roads?
Yeah, there's no need to reject anything. This is additional. This was added by the House, so
Okay.
you can either decide if you want to agree with it, you can concur. Otherwise,
We'll concur.
Okay.
Concur.
On page 74 is the State Highway PAYGO Capital Project. The first recommendation was to restrict $27,000 and change for Deer Park and Garrett County, which is a town that's delinquent on their audits. The House rejected this item.
We'll concur with the first House.
Okay. On the bottom of page 74 is a color page that would contingent on the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Project receiving a federal build grant to help fund the NEPA study for that project. It would fence off $5 million from the State Highway PAYGO program to be used for that purpose as well.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
Adopt, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, on bottom of page 75 was an additional first House addition stating intent on suicide prevention barriers on bridges. However, there is a color page on page 76, which slightly modifies this. The Senate modification would add in State Highway Administration. The original language only applied to counties and municipalities, and also expresses specific intent that the State Highway address a bridge on I-68.
Chairman, I move to modify the first House and adopt Senate color page.
Second.
Been first and second to modify the first House and adopt the Senate color page. All those in favor?
On page 77, item 2 is additional first House actions. It's committee narrative requesting a report on road construction worker safety.
Okay.
And on item 3 on the bottom of page 77 is a related item to the intent language in item 1. This requests State Highway to study best practices for the construction of suicide prevention barriers on bridges and share that information with the counties and the municipalities.
Okay.
That takes us, yep, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. On page 79, we have the Maryland Port Administration. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred, the first House adopted.
Okay.
Next, on page 80, we have the PAYGO capital allowance for that MPA. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Concur.
On page 81, we have the Motor Vehicle Administration. Here we have DLS recommended requesting a report on Real ID implementation, actually 2 reports. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
On the next page, we have an additional Senate color page item for the Motor Vehicle Administration that would restrict $250,000 pending a report on changes to the vehicle emissions inspection program.
Mr. Chairman, I say we adopt.
Motion's been put forward to adopt the color page. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 83 is the PAYGO capital budget for the Motor Vehicle Administration. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Okay. On page 84 is the Maryland Transit Administration. The recommendation, number 1, was to concur with the governor's allowance. However, there was action on this budget. On page 84, there is a BRFA action, DLS 107, which would recommended adding a provision relieving MTA of the need to meet the operating mandate. The House rejected this item. I would mention that their supplemental budget number 4, which you will be briefed on tomorrow, does have some items in there that pertain to these to this action, and another one we'll get to on the next page. But at this point, you can take whatever actions you like and modify that once you've heard the supplemental, if you just so decide. So BRFA action on page 84.
Got it. So we'll concur with the House.
Okay, and then on page 85, an additional first house action added restricted funds pending a report on non-emergency medical transport and the adequacy in the local operating transit systems funding for that purpose. This is new House language.
And we'll concur with the House language.
On page 86 is the second piece that relates to the MTA operating. It adds a section that restricts 67.1 million, which is the amount the budget came in under the mandate. Restricts 6.5 million from the Secretary's office capital and the remaining 6.6 from State Highway. Again, the House added this, and you can adopt if you'd like, and then deal with it tomorrow after you've heard the supplemental budget.
Yep, we'll concur with the House.
On page 87 is a color page item. This would restrict $100,000 pending a report on establishing bus service to the Trade Point Atlantic site.
Can we adopt?
Yes, sir. There's been a motion to adopt the color page. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 88, second, another color page item would restrict $100,000 pending a report on establishing a MARC station within the East Baltimore Development Inc. footprint to provide a better access to the Johns Hopkins Hospital.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Motion's been first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
And then the final item for MTA on page 89, the additional color page item is simply committee narrative expressing intent that MTA look at extending MARC service to Western Maryland as part of its development of the statewide transit plan.
Mr. Chairman, I say we adopt.
Adopt the narratives. And, first and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On the next page, on page 90, we have the Maryland Aviation Administration. Here, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the first house adopted. However, there is a Senate color page here, which would request a report on aircraft noise mitigation and efforts being undertaken by MAA to address concerns about that.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
So move.
Second. Motion's been first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
On the following page, we have the PAYGO capital budget for the Aviation Administration. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
On the next page, we have the Maryland Transportation Authority. Here, DLS recommended adding budget bill language restricting $2.5 million in both the Aviation Administration and the Port Administration, pending an MDTA report on fiscal stress. However, the first house modified this to restrict $500,000 apiece and changed the deadline to November 15th.
Will concur with the modified language.
So move.
Been motioned and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
On the next page, page 94, we have the PAYGO capital budget for the Transportation Authority. It's non-budgeted, the agency concurred, and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Page 95 is the Department of Natural Resources. First recommendation there is to adopt narrative on Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
On the bottom of page 95 is a BRFA action that repeals for fiscal 22 only the mandated funding that goes to the Fisheries Research and Development Fund. It's $1,794,000. The first house adopted this action.
Concur.
On page 96, it's additional first house actions. The first one there is a Montgomery County Enhanced Deer Management Strategy Committee narrative report. The first house adopted that.
Concur.
Recommendation or second additional first house action on the bottom of page 96 is to restrict $100,000 for a coal combustion byproducts recovery report.
Move we modify the restriction to 50,000, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
The motion's been moved and seconded to modify the funding restriction to 50,000. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Moving now to page 98, middle of the page there's another BRFA action. This is 303 APP additional. This will require the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission to transfer up to $5 million from its park taxes balance to the general fund.
Mr. Chairman, it's a modified transfer to $8 million.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I made a mistake here. I think we should just concur with the House with the 5 million.
Yep.
I
Motion's been,
apologize. I was thinking of some other issue and I got mixed up, so I apologize. But if we could just change
Nope.
that, modify. I'm sorry, Senator Sailing.
Okay.
Just leave
Yep.
it at 5. We're okay.
no problem. It's been a motion just for clarity, modify and concur with the House with the $5 million. It's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Bottom of page 98 is additional color page items from the Senate. This one is an impact assessment study of Maryland's coyote populations narrative.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
Move to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Page 99, the second color page from the Senate. This is a Patapsco Valley State Park Access Improvements Report.
Motion to adopt the color page.
So moved.
No, Mr. Chairman.
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
And on the bottom of page 99 is the third color page, data on oyster lease locations in Maryland. A report on that as well.
Motion to adopt.
Yes.
Second.
And first and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Moving now to page 101, this is the Department of Agriculture. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance and the first house adopted.
Concur.
On page 102, the first item is a piece of narrative requesting a report on the Justice Reinvestment Act, the House adopted.
Concur.
The second item is narrative on position abolishments and reclassifications. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 103, item number 3 is a report on recidivism, and the House adopted this.
Concur.
On page 104, there's a color page item for your consideration that would restrict $100,000 for a report on audited inmate medical expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
So moved.
Adopt. Second.
First and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
On page 106, the first item is narrative on the Maryland Correctional Enterprises staffing programs and sales. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 107, this is language that would restrict, excuse me. So on page 107, there was a recommendation that was modified by the House. On page 108, their modification increases the amount restricted to $200,000 and releases the report on, or releases the funds on the second submitted report on hiring and attrition.
Concur with the modified House language.
On page 109, item number 3 is a report on pre-release opportunities, and the House rejected this item. This is also, I can just go through the next 2 items because they're all related. On page 110, there is a House action that restricts $2.8 million in general funds to operate the Southern and Eastern pre-release units to keep them from closing at the end of this fiscal year. And there's a BRFA item at the bottom of page 110 that would allow the department to transfer these employees to other facilities. So the House adopted the restriction of $2.8 million, and they rejected the BRFA item, and they rejected the report on page 109.
Is there a motion to reject both House actions and then also rejecting the BRFA action with the House?
Yes.
It's been seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 111, there's a color page item for your consideration requesting a report on programs, treatment, and re-entry.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
Second.
Adopt, Mr. Chairman.
It's been first and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 112, color page 2 is a request for a report on state and local pre-release cooperation.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page? Adopt.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
The next items are on page 114. For community supervision, the first item is a report on caseloads and staffing. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
The second item is a reduction of $2 million in order to match vacancy trends. The agency disagreed and the House rejected this item.
Chair, I move we reject the first House and adopt the DLS action.
Motion's been first and second to reject that first House action and adopt DLS action. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 115, this is a House action which restricts $100,000 pending a report on a new senior monitor classification, and there's language that directs the department and DBM to create that new classification.
Concur.
On page 116, there's a color page item for your consideration, restricting $250,000 for a report on supervisees, parole and probation supervisees who are involved in murders or shootings.
Mr. Chairman, I say we adopt.
Adopt is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been adopted and seconded to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 118 for the Police and Correctional Training Commissions, the DLS recommendation was to concur and the House adopted. However, there's a color page item for your consideration, which would request a report on dementia response training.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
Move to adopt.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
On page 120 for the Division of Pretrial Detention and Services, The first piece of language restricts $7.1 million in substance use disorder treatment services so that they can only be used for that purpose. The agency disagreed with this action and the House adopted.
Concur.
The second item is a restriction of $500,000 to receive a report on the renegotiation of the Chesapeake Detention Facility Agreement, and the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 121, the item number 3 for pretrial detention requests a report, or it restricts $100,000 requesting a report on the Substance Use Disorder Treatment Services Program and Provider for GPSCS. The agency disagreed with the funding restriction, but agreed for the report, and the House adopted the action.
Chairman, I move we reject the first house.
Motion's been first and second to reject the first house action. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving now to page 123, this is the Department of the Environment. First recommendation there is a budget committee narrative, on the budgeting and prior year actual personnel expenditures. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
On page 124, additional first house actions. The first house action there restricts $200,000 until the submission of the Maryland Scrap Tire Annual Report.
Concur.
Recommendation number 2 on the bottom of page 124 is restriction of funding for until reports submitted on enforcement inspection, position strength assessment, and also for the vacant position filling.
Concur.
Moving now to page 127, there are additional color page items for the Senate. First item there restricts funding $100,000 until the submission of the report on source water for residential wells.
Mr. Chairman, I say we adopt.
Is the first to adopt the color page? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving on to page 129, the second color page restricts $100,000 until the submission of a report on per and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
Is there a motion to adopt the color page?
So moved.
Second.
It's been first and second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving now to page 130 is the Maryland Environmental Service. The first recommendation there is on a funding statement. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Moving now to page 131 is one color page item there. It's for narrative on procurement procedures and rate setting.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion's been first and second to adopt the color page. All those in favor? Motion carried.
For the Department of Juvenile Services on page 133, DLS recommended restricting $250,000 pending a receipt of a report on the Baltimore City Strategic Partnership and the funding associated with this partnership. The first house modified that on page 134 to restrict $100,000.
Sure. With the first house?
Okay, Department of State Police, item number 1 is a DLS recommendation to delete 8 new civilian positions and the associated funding to account for current vacancies. The agency disagreed, the first house rejected.
Concur.
Item number 2 proposes to increase the turnover expectancy for new positions provided to the licensing division to 25%, as is consistent with budgeting standards. The amount reduction associated with that is $256,000. The agency disagreed. The first house rejected.
Mr. Chair, I move we reject the first house and adopt DLS.
Second.
Motion's been moved and seconded to reject the first house action and adopt the LS action. All those opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, item number 3 on the bottom of page 136 is narrative requesting a update on the NIBRS or National Incident-Based Reporting System implementation. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
Okay, item number 4 on page 137 is annual language to restrict funds pending the submission of the Uniform Crime Report. The DLS recommendation was to restrict $1 million. However, on page 138 onto 139, the House modified this to restrict $250,000.
Concur with the House. Concur with the House.
On page 140, there is a color page. And this is language restricting funds pending the submission of a report from the Department of State Police to address some related to racial diversity, barriers to diverse employment, and to provide various measurable statistics and goals associated with that.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion's been moved and first and second to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Color page number 2 is on the bottom of page 142. It's narrative that requests information on the Department of State Police's operations in Baltimore City. This includes the Enhanced Disability Patrol as well as actions associated with the PROTECT Act.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Motion's been first and seconded to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, on page 144, color page number 3 is narrative requesting funding metrics and performance metrics for the Vehicle Prevention Fund.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Chair, say we adopt.
Motion's been first and second to adopt the color page. All those in favor?
Okay, on page 145, we have our final item. This is back of the bill language that would restrict funds in the Office of the Comptroller, as well as Frostburg University, pending actions to address some repeat findings from an OLA audit related to cybersecurity. This also requests that Baltimore County local school systems also partake in the actions described in this language.
Move to adopt, Mr. Chair.
Second.
There's been a first and a second to adopt the color page. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, and that is our final item, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Do we have to adopt the whole package, I guess?
Second.
The package has been adopted. First and second to adopt the whole package in its entirety. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Just want to say just thank you as a team. I can't say it enough in reference to the work product that we came out of with PST. I know that it couldn't have happened without yourself, my colleagues, but also wouldn't have been able to happen without the staff, and just wanted to say thank you again. This ends the hearing.
Mr. Chairman, we need to thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sale. And this ends the hearing for PSTE at 3:57 p.m. March 18th. Thank you again.